Welcome everybody. So happy to be back with you here, and so happy to get to spend some time here with you on Community Capital Live. We are excited today to talk with Adriana Abizadeh from the Kensington Corridor Trust. And just to give us a quick rundown, this is a partnership. This is really all about highlighting the investment funds that are building the new economy, that are building local economies, that are building resilient and equitable economies. And I'm really grateful to get to be a part of this at all. We are joined by first I'll mention our partner organizations, the Main Street Journal, Neighborhood Economics, Impact Alpha, and the Mindful Marketplace Show. Our panel today, I'm really excited to have both Michael Schuman, who is the author of several books on local investing. If you're new to local investing, read his books, especially the most recent one, Local Dollars, Local Cents. Also, Kevin Jones, who is the co-founder of Neighborhood Economics, which convenes impact investors, convenes social entrepreneurs and other local justice workers to do community impact investing throughout the country. And I am Joel Skeen. I'm the host of the Mindful Marketplace Show on what has been Biz Radio US, which is actually unfortunately shutting down due to the hurricane. And we'll be talking about what that's going to mean here later with the other guys. So sorry to drop that news on y'all, but we'll be figuring it out. Let's get into it here with Adriana. I also want to mention Impact Alpha. They're going to be we're going to be partnering with them and having a database of all of these, both on YouTube, on the Main Street Journal, and on Impact Alpha. So let's get into it today, Adriana. I want to let Kevin talk with you a bit because I know he has to run. He's in the middle of doing some disaster relief work in the Asheville area here. But first, just tell us a little bit, Adriana, about the Kensington Corridor Trust and kind of how that came together.
Thanks, Joel. Yeah, so I'm Adriana Abizadeh with the Kensington Corridor Trust. We are based in Philly. We were founded about 5 years ago in 2019, and we were formed as an organization that would be collectively owned and collectively controlled by the neighborhood to purchase real estate, take it out of the market, so decommoditize it, and put it into a trust for the neighborhood to directly own, govern, and control. And the purpose is really twofold. The first is to preserve affordability in this neighborhood, which is actively changing and experiencing gentrification and displacement. And the second was to ensure local control and ownership over that real estate in the face of a changing market and a changing neighborhood. And so for the last 5 years, we've been acquiring properties. We do both land conservation and building preservation.
Great.
Joel, you are muted.
Kevin, you go for it.
Okay, great. Adriana, I'm a real fan of your model, which is now called corridors. And folks, at our Neighborhood Economics Conference, we had a gathering. From what I understand, it's the first actual gathering at a national conference of the folks doing the corridor approach. So that's not just buy back the block, that's buy back several blocks in a row. Kensington is seen as the national leader, but we had folks who were doing it in Crenshaw, LA, in Kansas City, in Baltimore, and trying to do it in San Antonio. And in this space, the people who are building this corridor, it has a rippling ecosystem economic effect that also creates justice. And if you talk to the other practitioners, they said, well, we're trying to get to where Kensington is. And that's good in one way. And the other way is that we validated that category to several bankers who were in the room, because you get this catalytic money, the foundation money, the rich folks' staff money, but you want to get to where bankers see this as a deal that is lower risk over time if they can see the world as a corridor. You have to validate the category. And Adriana's work is as a leader, but she's also validating that category because you want the institutional money to be able to see this new way they're doing it. So can you talk about yourself as not just a leading entrepreneur, but building the space where corridors make sense to folks and why they make sense?
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. I would say I think for us from a positioning standpoint, we are really intentionally telling folks this is not a one single property, strategy. It's not a one block strategy. We're looking at 1.4 miles that are touching different census tracts. And our work in the acquisition has been extremely dense. So we've been really intentional to acquire properties that are next to each other or really, really close to each other so that you can also see the physical change as the acquisitions are coming into the portfolio, they're being rehabbed and brought back online. And as we look at our partners across the country who are also engaged in corridor work, there's really a centering point, which is around economic mobility and opportunity and access. And if you are able to attract small businesses to the corridor, oftentimes those folks will take a real stake in that neighborhood, right? They are invested in what happens there. They're invested in the residents, the foot traffic, the safety, the health and vibrancy, the other small businesses, right, that make up their small business community. And the corridor can be this central point for revitalization, right? It's almost the jump off point, if you would. And it can spur out into the side streets, into the blocks, parallel and perpendicular. And so that's what we've started to see here in Kensington is as we've gone through some acquisitions and attracted some small businesses to the corridor, we're also seeing the increase in activity, adjacent to the corridor or nearby the corridor of other small businesses that are coming, other investors who are interested in working in this space. And I think the thing to keep in mind with the neighborhood trust model that we've been building is that because it was so new and so innovative, 5 years ago, you're 100% right that philanthropy were the ones who were really making it happen, right? So it was philanthropic dollars, staff dollars, individual investors who were value aligned. And we're moving into a space where we'll eventually be able to diversify some of that revenue stream that's coming in for investment, right? Get the banks, get the CDFIs, because long term for sustainability, you will need all of the pots, right? You will need as much access as you can to different streams of revenue. And it's that de-risking tool at the front end that philanthropy played, such a huge role in so that it becomes more viable for traditional markets.
And why do you think that it's rippling out without you causing it? That other things are happening around you. What's causing that?
Yeah, I think it's like trickle down, right? Like economics triggers other economics. So people see activity, they see investment in green spaces, they see activity and investment in the corridor, small businesses. You get folks who are then like, oh, well, this block was previously highly vacant, now it's not. Maybe I want to own a stake here. Maybe I want to purchase a home. Maybe I want to start my small business. I also think that we have the benefit here in Kensington, and I'm sure many of our partners across the country do as well, of having a really rich nonprofit infrastructure that exists in this neighborhood. And so we have 3 community development corporations that all overlap inside of this neighborhood. And it's spurring to them as well. If it hadn't already, right, that the corridor was a central point, I think now seeing activation and investment signals to them and to their funders, right, because we're all tapping into different sources of funds, that this is a space where we should be investing, where we should be supporting small businesses, where we should be supporting folks who are trying to make Kensington home and keep Kensington home.
And do you find that the philanthropic folks, as this is happening, are learning to value intermediaries and the social capital that needs to be built and the things around, trauma in a historical place, all those sorts of social things, are they starting to be recognized in a way?
I think so. I think, the country overall has had a lot of ebb and flow around social, racial, and economic justice, right? But I think by and large, what we're hearing from folks is that they really see how this touches all of the aspects, right? It has upward mobility, it has economic access, it has small business support, it has homeownership, it has housing affordability. It's got beautification, which then leads to, beauty and safety and health on the corridor. So it really is touching so many different aspects at once that I think philanthropy sees that. The other thing that I think too is that philanthropy really sees, particularly the neighborhood trust model, as a way to really meet the needs that are coming directly from the folks that are impacted, right? So since we are
Right.
entirely governed by the neighborhood, they're the ones who are dictating the agenda. They're the ones who say what we acquire, how we develop it, how we reactivate it. That agenda is not being set by an outsider.
Right. And do you find that they're seeing the value of networking between that ecosystem? Are you be able to value the ecosystem and the building of that ecosystem and those intermediaries?
Absolutely, yeah, I think so. And I think over the last year or two, Kensington Corridor Trust specifically, we've really been trying to figure out how to coalesce some of that energy nationally, right? Because to your earlier point around being convened nationally, it's not really happening. We convene ourselves sometimes in small rooms, but no one's going, hey, everybody who's doing alternative ownership and community collective ownership, let's meet in Atlanta, right? Or like let's all catch up in Philly. And so KCT, as part of our own strategic planning efforts, we've been trying to figure out in partnership with some of our ecosystem partners how we play a role in that and what that looks like, because it's its own sector that's emerging. It's rapidly emerging. There's lots of different ideas, right? Not everybody's a neighborhood trust, and that's okay, right? Like there's lots of different ways to do this work, but we all need to be in community together and learn from each other and solution find together. So it is definitely something that's at the forefront for us, on our minds.
Yeah. Well, this is, forming like all markets form, and the value of the intermediaries and the validation of a category. And yes, you can do these steps to replicate it is what they really like to see. So, Michael, I'll hand it over to you. I've taken enough time. I'm at this disaster meeting and I may need to go out and schmooze with some rich folks.
Great.
Thanks, Kevin.
Good luck, Kevin.
Try to be polite.
Couple of just questions. So what's the story of how this got off the ground, in terms of time and how you got involved and how you pulled partners in to launch this?
Thanks, Michael. Yeah, so we were formed in 2019, after about 1 to 2 years worth of discussion among local partners in the neighborhood. So we were formed by institutions, so folks who were representing organizations that were already working here. One was a community development corporation. One was a small business incubator and accelerator. One was a private B Corp developer. And the last partner is the City of Philadelphia's Public-Private Partnership for Economic Development. And they all came around the table to really talk about investment that was coming into the neighborhood that would potentially, if not already was, causing displacement, rising property values, rising investment, external investment. And during that time that they were, chatting and talking, 2017, 2018, and started to think about and look at different models across the country, there was an article that came out in spring of 2019 in the Social Stanford Innovation Review Journal that was written by a tenured professor at Cornell. His name is Joseph Margulies. And Joe essentially wrote this piece in frustration and stated, just wouldn't it be great if neighborhoods owned their own real estate and could make their own decisions about what they held in collective so that they could self-determine their future? And he gave it, right, this model in theory, he gave it the name a neighborhood trust. And so the founders of Kensington Corridor Trust picked up that model in theory, gave it some legal teeth, gave it some financial teeth, and created the Kensington Corridor Trust. So that was in 2019. And then I was hired at the top of 2020. I was brought into this work as I was stepping down from a prior executive director role at another nonprofit. And I believe I was selected for this work because I was able to bring affordable housing experience and expertise alongside public policy advocacy experience and expertise. And so I had kind of the duality of what this model ended up being, which is the ability to generate and create and bring online affordable housing in a way that is also helping to mobilize folks in that neighborhood to move policy that benefits them and their communities. And it's been a whirlwind of the last 5 years. We've raised capital to acquire properties. We've started leasing. So it's just a little bit over 2 years now since we started leasing on the corridor. And our team has been growing little by little. We acquire about 5 properties per year, and we currently have 27 in the trust. And we're closing on 2 more this Friday. So we'll have 29 as of Friday.
And when you say acquire, do you mean long-term ownership of the properties?
Perpetual ownership of the properties, yes. So they go into a perpetual purpose trust, which is a very specific type of trust structure that allows you to perpetually hold and protect the assets that are inside of it, liquid or physical, for a purpose. And so our purpose is twofold. The first is intergenerational affordability, and the second is collective control of real estate.
So there was a chunk of philanthropy required at the top to get this rolling. How big was that chunk?
Yeah, so our initial catalytic grant that we received from the Barra Foundation was for $350,000, and that allowed the board to hire me. And then we received our first mission-aligned investment, so debt dollars, from the Patricia Kind Family Foundation, which is a local family office here in Philadelphia, that allowed us to purchase our first parcels. And then we just kind of kept going from there. So both of those spurred what we call kind of both sides of our capital house, right? Our grant side that doesn't need to be repaid, and our debt side, which will be recovered over time.
Do you feel like you'll be able to hit a kind of ongoing velocity where it's nice to have the grant dollars, but you don't need it to continue?
Yes, and I will say our grant dollars that we bring in annually right now are only really for the use of our operations. So things that we're not going to recover, like staff salary, like our activation of the community garden that we steward and events at that garden space. The rest of it, we're applying the debt that we're receiving from foundations and individual investors. So our acquisitions are happening primarily with debt. Our rehab and our reactivation are also happening primarily with debt. And as we continue to raise, we're definitely raising more debt dollars than we are grant dollars. Our annual operating costs are still under $1 million in grants each year. So the majority and the bulk of our dollars are going directly into the real estate in the form of debt.
Are there opportunities for grassroots investors to put money into the project?
100% taking investments all day long. Happy to always be in dialogue with folks who are interested in investing. We are very explicitly seeking investments from folks who are willing to be patient, because this investment will require kind of, long road or long runway. We need to acquire the property, we have to rehab the property, and then reactivate the property, which, depending on the size and scale of an asset, can be a several-year process. And so on the front end of most of our loan products that we've received, we have interest only and interest only deferred periods, which allow us to get that work done. And then once we lease them and begun revenue generation, then we begin repayment of the principal and interest on the loan.
Right. And how long do you expect before you start repaying people on the debts debt money they've given you?
It will vary based on the notes that we receive from folks. The majority of the notes that we're receiving are between 10 and 15-year term periods, starting back, 5 years ago. So some of them will come, they'll get called in about 5 years, but we have taken some shorter term loans. And actually right now we're in the process of paying off one entirely. So it just really does vary based on the loan terms.
Right. Well, one last question, and then we'll open it up to the audience, because I know they have a bunch of questions too. And
Sure.
that is, if I'm a grassroots investor, do I have to be living in the state of Pennsylvania, or is it national?
No, you can invest nationally. We just ask that you match the terms that we're requesting on the notes. So we don't accept debt at this time above 2% interest rate. And so that knocks a bunch of folks out because they're like, 2%. But that's what allows us to preserve the affordability without having to bring in a significant subsidy infusion, which allows me to move more quickly than the traditional affordable housing developer, and has allowed us to amass so many assets in a short period of time, right? Because we can be nimble and I can be responsive to the market because the market is moving, right? Let's not mince here. I am very actively competing with folks who are also trying to acquire either for speculation or for market rate plus development.
How many investors do you have in the project right now?
Whew. Well, if you go to the KCT website, so the Kensington Corridor Trust website, there's a support us page where everyone who's an institution is publicly named, and a couple of our individual investors, but we're probably in the ballpark of about 40, 45 investors at this point, varying ranges from 25,000 to 5 million.
So, and what about in the $100 range, or is that, when I said grassroots investors, I was thinking small
like
small
a non-accredited.
Yeah.
Yes. So we are actually moving in that direction now, and we should be opening up to non-accredited investors by the end of 2025. So it is like in progress. And that was very directly a mandate from the neighborhood, right? Folks were like, it's great that you're developing this for us and we're collectively owning it and we get to collectively govern it. But also, if there's dividends, we'd like to receive those dividends individually for the folks, who can. So our structure will be investments as low as $10 per month. So $120 for the year will be the lowest investment category.
Fabulous. Well, I've got a ton of other questions, but Kevin, back to you.
Well, yeah, and I want to make sure that we hit. I know we had one coming from Nicole. Nicole, regular here with us from Equal Exchange. Basically, just asking about those non-accredited investors. You said, would the non-accredited investors have to be Pennsylvania only? Was the first question we had.
Yeah, so I think I see two, right? Well, non-accredited investors, BPA only, and then how are you raising the debt dollars? I'll start on the latter. So we are still building out the structure. I do not believe that they will have to be Pennsylvania only, but we are going to set up preferred classes. So there will be different tiers of investors, and our prioritized tier that will have the highest dividend return rate and the least risk from a capitalistic standard are the folks who live in the 19134 zip code. So they are the preferred class. What we're imagining right now is that our second preferred class would be Philadelphia residents, so more broad, right? So not just the zip code, but the entire city. And then we're exploring what a third and fourth class could look like. Is it the state of Pennsylvania? Do we just go straight national? Do we want to go national? So we'll be, taking a really hard look at that over the next 6 months or so. It's not a fully baked idea yet. We just know that the neighborhood has said we want to invest, and it's my job to figure out how to make that happen. And then in terms of the raising the debt dollars, it is twofold. It is either directly from foundations, so it's coming from their endowment, and they're giving us either program-related investments or mission-aligned investments, or we have wealth advisors who are directing DAF holders to lend to us from their DAFs, from their donor advised funds. Those are the two primary methods of debt raising at this moment, and all of our debt is unsecured, so it's not leaned against the properties. You're lending to Kensington Corridor Trust, the entity, and we are then moving quickly and nimbly to acquire.
I
Do you want?
think that, I wanted to ask a question too on
Yeah.
the other side from financing, but on the side really of the development strategy. You talked about the corridor, the 1 point, however many square miles that you guys kind of look at broadly. I'm curious about the development strategy in those corridors, what you're using the dollars for, and kind of how those communities are being developed that you're seeing works best.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So our corridor is 1.4 miles long. In that, there's over 620 assets. We are actively acquiring on 4 blocks at the moment. So we're pretty intentional about where we actively acquire. And that's back to what I mentioned earlier, that density strategy, right? So it is a block by block approach, but it's really a property by property approach, right? And we're trying to be extremely intentional about the physical built environment in that acquisition set. So, right, there's no physical change or impact to an entire block if we own one property all the way down at one end of 1.4 miles and another property down at the other end of 1.4 miles. But if those properties are right next to each other or sit across the street from each other, you can visually see and feel that impact. And so that's been our strategy. And I just shared in the chat the link to our stewarded properties map, which is maintained in real time all the time for the benefit of the neighborhood so they know what they collectively own. And you'll see there how dense some of these acquisitions are, right? There's one block where we own almost the entire side of one side of that block. That's been very intentional over the course of the last 5 years as properties have come on the market. We've been really aggressive to ensure that we are actively negotiating them and getting them into the trust. I will also just name too that I think beyond the density strategy and beyond the physical built environment, there's also the sense of community that is built when multiple units come online at the same time with small businesses and residents, right? So it's healthier from like a community perspective and neighborhood perspective to have the business next door to you also open at the same time or around the same time as you versus like opening and everything around you still vacant. And so, while it feels aligned to the density strategy, it is also part of a different strategy, which is
So
really
you're
about
like a
ensuring that there is
business
community.
association as well as an investment entity.
Yeah, sort of. So, now that you bring that up, I'll drop another link in the chat, which is to our resource center. And if folks are interested, we have developed a models comparison chart, and business improvement districts is one of the ones we compared ourselves against because we do play some of the same elements that a business improvement district would play, but we don't levy the tax. So there's no fee for the beautification and unification efforts that the trust does. We're bringing that as part of our larger value alignment with the corridor.
And, we got a question from Stephanie here about if there's any protection for investors who happen to be low income in case there may be any loss.
Yes, and I saw Stephanie's question specifically around the loan loss. There will be a loan loss reserve. So what we'll be doing is developing a vehicle that sits inside of our perpetual purpose trust that would allow for direct investment from non-accredited investors with the preferred classes as noted. And the lowest risk will be to those who are in the 19134 zip code, and there will be a loan loss reserve specifically set up for them to ensure that there is no financial risk to those folks because from a traditional capitalistic perspective, their risk is the highest because it's the largest percentage of their household annual income when they're investing.
Right. And I like this question here from Nick because it's talking about some of the obstacles. I have a question about maybe the other obstacles too that you might be facing that you may be able to speak to, but specifically he's asking about the regulatory hurdles when it comes to offering these investments to non-accredited investors.
Mhm.
And any insight you can give there on the exclusions or anything like that. And I'm curious too about obstacles maybe outside of that that you think people might not have thought of before that you might be running into.
Yeah. Yeah. On the regulatory side, we will have to do filings. So it'll be different from the way that we're currently taking investment, because right now it's all at the entity level. This will be very specifically an offering that's put out. I want to be really honest and just say that, like, because we are still very much exploring the model, I'm not exactly sure what it'll look like. I think like 6 months from now I'll be expert, but like in this moment in December, I'm like, oh, we just decided that this was the thing that we can legally do, and now we have to figure out how to legally do it. But my hope is that it's the simplest way possible, right? We look at other folks who are doing it across the country, like community investment trust, community stewardship trust. There are different folks who already have models set up. And so our hope is to do, joint learning from them. We're not trying to reinvent the wheel on how to take, those investments from non-accredited investors, and not related to the regulatory, but a hurdle that I think we will need to overcome. And we're actively working on developing now with a partner, is because we are in a neighborhood that is predominantly low income folks, right? Our average household median income in this neighborhood is $25,000 a year. Most folks have never invested in something, right? Like, let alone real estate directly and in collective. And so the hurdle will be education, right? Like, how do we make sure that folks understand both the value of the collective asset ownership with individualized benefit and dividend? How do folks look at it as part of a larger portfolio of an investment, right? Can we spur additional investment into other things in their life? So we're going to be working on some curriculum development with one of our partners, because that will be a hurdle, right? Like, how do you get folks who are already tapped for their dollars to see, this $10 a month or whatever amount they can offer as an investment towards their future? Not they're just their future, but the generations that come after them as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to get to, I know Steven's got a question here, but I want to kind of follow up with what Stephanie's asking more. She's asking if we can talk more about the loan loss fund. Like, how will it be seeded? Is that by philanthropy? Sounds like she's working on another project in Baltimore that's similar.
Yes, it will.
And
Like,
Stephanie, if you can
99%
unmute,
sure.
I'd be happy to fill in here and let you just go ahead and kind of finish those thoughts and conversations, Stephanie, if you'd like to jump on.
Sure. Hello, everyone. So I don't know if you're familiar with the Invest York Road project in Baltimore, but we are working along a 2.5 mile corridor to do very similar things to what you're doing. Our project is a little different in that it's really come from the grassroots. So it's always been volunteer community led with a very interesting board structure to make sure that community voice is in control of everything. One thing actually that you might benefit from, we've been running free financial education classes in the quarter for the past 3 years. We have a community created curriculum and a really innovative way of teaching. So feel free to reach out if you're curious about that. But for us, we have found, we're using grassroots investment crowdfunding for a piece of the capital stack. We have money from the state for a bulk of the capital stack. And this notion of a loan loss fund has been one of the more complicated pieces to figure out how to legally fold it in with grassroots investment crowdfunding, and also how to have enough capital there to really have weight. So, I would love to hear how you're building that. And actually, when we've talked to the people from East Portland, they've basically said, don't copy what we did. It's like the most complicated thing. So I feel like we haven't been able to find a model that fits what we're doing.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And yes, I would definitely love to follow up on the curriculum and any innovation you have around deployment of that curriculum. So we are having early stage conversations with some of our existing funders to see if they would provide philanthropic capital that is not to be recovered to sit in the reserve, because at the same time, we are also building a rent reserve. So because the majority, if not, well, all of our tenants are low income folks on the residential side, they experience hardship, right? Like, things happen, they lose a job, right? We know that many folks are one paycheck away, and catching up can be really difficult. And so we have been working to build a rent reserve, and we're going to kind of bucket both of these things. They're separate reserves, but bucket them together in our asks to build them out. And so that is our hope. I don't know if we will be successful. I think we've had some really positive conversations so far. I think there's deep interest, particularly at the national level, by some major kind of like larger philanthropic institutions to ensure that risk to local investors is minimized as much as possible. So I think we will hopefully be successful. That's my goal. If we're not successful in that, then I will just keep beating drums until I am. But we definitely do need to do that. We do need to de-risk for them because it is a significantly larger risk than it would be to some of the other categories of investors.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Stephanie. I appreciate getting to see something similar happen there. That's awesome. Stephen, I would like to go ahead and give you the floor here for a second, man.
Okay, great. One great topic and great work you're doing, and I appreciate what you've been doing. I've kind of been working on this model in the DC area for my entire career. Happened to have grown up outside Philly, so I know Kensington, and you definitely have a real mission there. The question I have is, so you're working on a lot of the components of rebuilding communities. Are you looking to, as you build your portfolio, manage your own properties? That's one question. The next one is, what type of end users, aside from affordable housing residents, are you able to attract in a community that clearly is going for a long-term transition?
Great question. So the first one is around property management. The second is around the attraction of residents and maybe small businesses too. Is that also a part?
Yes.
Yeah, great. So yes, we do our own in-house property management. So myself and our construction project manager have been sharing it for the last 2-ish years since we started leasing. And about 6 months ago, he came up to me and he's like, I love you. He's like, but I don't love you this much. So you need to go find a property manager. And so we went out into the universe trying to find a value aligned property manager, like a third party that we could hire to do it for us. And we just simply could not find someone that we felt comfortable with. And so we decided with the support of our board to bring that in-house fully and hire a full-time operations and property manager who actually just started yesterday, full-time. And so we plan to do it in-house for as long as we can handle it in-house, because the value alignment was a huge piece that was missing in our search externally, particularly around like evictions and rental recovery and just the way that we engage with folks. There was like lots of super problematic conversations that we had externally with people. So it is in-house. In terms of the attraction, so right now all of the units that the Kensington Corridor Trust has available for lease on the residential side are at 30% of AMI, so deep affordability. We anticipate that will increase over time. So we'll have some 40%, some 50, 60, 70, and 80. 80 is our cap. So I don't anticipate at this time, based on the policies we have in place set by our Trust Stewardship Committee, that will exceed 80% of AMI, because there are other folks generating units at above that price point. Our goal is really to preserve affordability. And on the small business side, those folks are, I would say, primarily low moderate. So it's a little bit more mixed currently than it is for the residential at this time. But 100% of the folks that we've attracted to the corridor so far from the small business front either grew up in this neighborhood or live here currently, which has just been a beautiful thing to have unfold organically, because we're really spurring some of that economic development from within, rather than having to attract outsiders to come spur that here alongside us. And so it was not something that I think we anticipated, and it's just happened beautifully over the last few years, and we're excited to continue to see that grow.
You're doing a great job. Congratulations. And as you know, you could build it, but you better maintain it well as well.
That's exactly right. Yeah, we so in addition to acquiring vacant parcels and vacant properties, we also acquire fully rehabbed properties from private developers that are looking to exit and speculators who are looking to exit, so that we can pull them back into affordability. And it's just super problematic when we bring some of those units in. We're like, oh my gosh, you have a broken mirror that's been broken in your bathroom, and you have like a 4-year-old kid running around, and that's been broken for how long? And your HVAC is dripping right on top of your TV in your living room, right? Like these things that like have just gone overlooked for so long. And so it's kind of like this running joke when we go to acquire property, like how long will the punch list be for this, for this occupied property that is supposedly fully rehabbed? So yeah, we're on top of it. We try to be on top of it as much as we can.
How big is your portfolio, both residential and commercial?
Yeah, so we have 27 assets in the trust right now, 29 as of this Friday. If I include the 2 that we're closing on this Friday, we'll have about 50 residential units and just shy, like about 15, 16 commercial spaces. And as I said, we acquire about 5 per year, and the parcels vary in size. In terms of activated spaces, we have currently, out of the 29 total, 9 of them are in redevelopment. So 9 of them are somewhere in our construction development pipeline. Only 1 of those is a new construction. So the other 8 are full gut rehabs.
Congratulations, good work.
Thank you.
I'm curious about the breakdown between residential and commercial that you guys are seeing. Is there a balance that you're shooting for, or what does that look like?
Yeah, so we are really constrained by the archetype of the corridor. So our residential to commercial will almost always outpace 2 to 1. If you think really inner city corridor, tightly packed, brick buildings, our first floor is commercial and our second and third are residential. So every time I pick up 1 commercial spot, I've automatically picked up 2 residential spots at minimum. Sometimes it's 4 to 1 in a property, just depending on its size. And so residential will always outpace the commercial because of the archetype of the corridor.
Makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Michael, I wanted to kick it back over to you here, and just kind of let you, I know that you've gotten to listen to a lot of other questions here. So I'm curious what else has come up for you in the last 15 minutes here.
Well, replicability. So I think a lot of people on this particular call and many others who will listen to this later are wondering, this seems like it would be highly replicable. The cost of doing this was not that enormous. We're not talking about tens of millions of dollars. We're talking a few million. What do you see as the kinds of challenges in repeating this and the things that were unique in Kensington that may be harder to replicate?
Yeah, so replicability is definitely top of mind for us. And since inception of the model, so we're fully governed by the neighborhood. I'm not sure if I've mentioned that yet. So in order to govern at the KCT, you have to live in or have a small business in the 19134 zip code, and that's legally codified into the structure. It's baked, can't be changed. And those folks decided that they wanted to evergreen our learnings, right? We wanted to make sure that as other folks were thinking about collective ownership, that everything we've learned has become a public resource, and that, we're not gatekeeping anything. And so on our resource center, which I linked earlier, we publish reports annually about, what does governance look like? How did we engage around this topic? What does our legal infrastructure look like? All of that is publicly available. We also make ourselves available for conversations like these with, different communities across the country at any time, just to make sure that folks have the answers to the questions that they need, and be a thought partner and supporter wherever we can, and make connections, right? We're not operating from a mindset of scarcity. It's a place of abundance. There's more than enough capital, right? It's just unlocking that capital and being in the right spaces and rooms with the right networks to be able to do so. And so as we think about replicability, one of the things that Philadelphia has, and Kensington specifically has, is that our real estate market is still considerably more affordable than most other national urban markets, right? So when we talk about, Kevin at the beginning brought up the conversations we had at Neighborhood Economics with Downtown Crenshaw, who's one of our ecosystem partners at the national level. The cost per square foot for acquisition is more than double what it is for me here in Philly. So I can acquire, an entire building for $200,000, $300,000 and rehab it and still be all done under $1 million. Where for them, 2-3 million is one property, right? Like, it's a very different scale of the dollars of how far they can go, because our real estate market is still depressed in comparison to some of the national markets. And I think when we talk about replicability, that's something that we're really at the forefront of being conscious with our partners around the country to talk around, is to say, like, hey, yeah, we've raised just under $20 million and we've been able to do all this, but like $20 million for you is going to be like 10 properties, where $20 million for us is almost 30 properties. And so it's just a different scale on the economics front. I think the other thing that we're being really intentional about, and I love to hear Stephanie when she brought this up around their work in Baltimore, has been that we really believe that other neighborhood trusts, as they form, and we replicate this model across the country, should come from the residents and the small business owners, not from the institutions. So we had to transition away from the institutions, which was lost time. because gentrification was still happening during that time. Speculation was still happening during that time. And we had to buckle down and think about our governance, right? And how we governed and how the neighborhood would have control over this model and its stewardship into the long run. If you start with the residents, you don't have to go through any of that, right? Like you just immediately start being neighborhood led and governed, and then you decide how you want to build from there. And so institutional support is really critical. It can provide a ton of social capital. It can open rooms and doors, but you can do that in a way without having them have a voice and have power to vote. You can do that through an advisory capacity, through, a thought leadership cabinet. There's lots of different ways you can structure that. But we really believe that these structures like this and other folks who are doing collective ownership, it should be governed entirely by the people that it impacts. They should have the ability to self-determine their future for their neighborhood.
And the city, what is the role of the city in this going forward? I mean, clearly they were important at the outset. Are they interested in bringing this to other corridors? Are they interested in supporting this with incentives, tax breaks, other things that could be useful to you?
Yeah, so I would say it has been an evolution. When the Kensington Corridor Trust was just formed, it was a different mayoral administration that just changed this past January. And under that mayor's administration, Kensington was not a priority. So like the entire neighborhood of Kensington was just not a priority in Philadelphia. It was not seen as a space that would generate returns, or that the investments made would be as fruitful as perhaps other corridors or other neighborhoods. That has completely like upside down in this current mayor's administration. She is deeply focused on Kensington. A lot of her running platform was based around investment into and support for. I served on the mayor's transition committee for economic development as she was moving towards inauguration. We've built really close relationships with folks in commerce and revenue and license and inspections, and we're trying to determine how to further that relationship. So KCT, Kensington Corridor Trust, I've almost been here for 5 years. The organization is 5 years old. I'm a couple months away from 5 years myself. We've never received city dollars or city land. And when we look at our counterparts across the country, they're like, oh, well, my city gave me 10 million, or like my city gave me 20 parcels. That has not happened in Philadelphia. And so we're trying to figure out how to close that gap as it relates to our national partners, because it is something that the city should have, some skin in the game and some support for. And I think it's just been relationship building and a change in mayor. And so we're hopeful that in 2025, we'll be able to see some of those first investments come into the trust.
It's great. Back to you, Joel.
Yeah, I'm really kind of moved by all the things you guys have been able to do. I'm wondering if you have a story, whether it's of a business or of a family in the community, or something that you feel like really is able to be emblematic of what you guys are doing there and what the real impact on the ground is.
I've got stories for days, Joel. Don't open me up for stories. Let's see, who do I want to pick? I'll start with our most recent business tenant move-in. So rather than starting from the beginning, I'll just tell you what happened 2 weeks ago. So we just had our most recent business move in. It's an African hair braiding shop, immigrant owned, woman from Mali. She has actually been on the corridor for a little over 7 years. So she's almost at the 8-year mark now. On the same block as some properties that we owned and stewarded. And about 6 months ago, she gave us a call. We've been engaging with her as a business owner, even though she's not in one of our spaces, as part of our broader work. And she gave us a call and was like, hey, there's mold in my building and the landlord doesn't want to remediate and my rent is going up. And we were like, well, that all sounds super problematic. Like, tell us what you want us to do. We can engage your landlord. We can call LNI. She's like, no, I just want to move. I just want to be on the same exact block where all my customers know how to find me, but I want to be in a cleaner space, in a safer space, and in a space where I know my rent's not going to be increased year over year, dramatically. And so she just moved in. So we just moved her in. She's literally just on the other side of our garden. So she was on the right-hand side of our garden. Now she's on the left-hand side of our garden. We bought her some furniture, helped her fit out her space. One of the things that we're really proud of is that all of the businesses we've attracted to the corridor have not taken on a single penny of debt to bring their business to the corridor. So we try to really fully cover the costs of fit out and first entry, because we know, particularly for low income and Black and brown business owners, that can be a huge hurdle to success when you have debt, strapped behind your P&L. And so we're really excited to have her. She's super happy. We're going to run a spread on her pretty soon. And my goal is now to go back to that landlord and try to buy his building. So, and bring it into the trust and rehab it.
And then moving from there, like from from a business owner or a home, like, is it moving towards owner operator at that point? Are they then moving to where, when it's all said and done, they actually own the space that they are in, or does that property stay within the trust, the ownership piece?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the trust is built so that properties can be perpetually held, and there's only one allowable exit, and that is to a long-term commercial tenant. And that was built very intentionally through advocacy by the small business community when the trust was being formed, because they said we want to be able to own our own buildings. We're totally fine with coming in and being a part of the trust, tenant list and roster, and we appreciate the opportunity to have low rent, but ultimately our ability to build wealth will be through the ownership of this land and this building. And so in partnership with the small businesses and directly through the Trust Stewardship Committee, which is the governance of the Perpetual Purpose Trust, we built out a policy so that there is that one legal allowable exit to a long-term commercial tenant so that they can own the property. It does exit land and built improvement. So unlike a CLT, we're not locking them out of the land value, but it does exit with a right of first refusal to come back into the trust. So the example that we always offer is, 20 years from now, you decide, you acquire the property from KCT. When you acquire it, we provide 10% equity. So we're selling it at 10% below market rate to them when they exit. 20 years from now, you want to retire to Florida. You no longer have interest in owning this property on the corridor. The Kensington Corridor Trust has right of first refusal to reacquire that property, bring it back into the trust, and pull it back into affordability. It also exits with an affordability covenant for the residential units for 3 years. So you have to maintain affordability on the residential in your building when you own it for the first 3 years. There'll be an exit curriculum that shows folks how to be great landlords and be in community with their tenants. We're trying to be as comprehensive as we possibly can in thinking about this one allowable exit. But outside of that, there are no exits allowed. So it is not a home ownership model. There's other folks in the neighborhood who do that work. We actually support our residents in accessing those programs, right? Like, you don't need to be a forever renter if you don't want to be, right? Like, go access home ownership. And then we can bring the next family in behind you, right? But also, if rental is what's best for you and your family for the long term, this unit will be here affordably for you as well.
Yeah, that sounds like a really brilliant kind of solve to that conflict of interest that might be happening with the small business community. And I think that's so big. I mean, so many of the towns that I've lived in, whether it's the Detroit area or it's here in Asheville, you see the gentrification happen a lot of times when business owners don't, they don't own the businesses. And so the chains or, the larger businesses will pay the landlords more. And so, love that you guys have a fix for that already built in. Was there anything else that was like a surprise to you that you guys were able, like an obstacle that you did face, but that you were able to come in the same way? Is there anything else that for people who might be looking to do the same kind of thing?
Yeah, let me see. I'm not sure if it's an obstacle, but it feels aligned with the conversation we were just having about the small businesses, is that we realized we were building a perpetual structure where humans are at the core and center of its governance, and humans move and humans age, right? And so we were really intentional, and this is again through learning, right? All of this is through learning. All of this is through being in partnership with other communities, through listening to the folks who are governing, that we really needed to have seats for youth. We needed to prioritize youth in our governance because they are the next set of leaders. And so we have 2 seats that are carved out for folks under the age of 21 to serve on governance alongside with full voting power, just as any other resident that's on the structure, so that we are building that leadership bench and succession planning here in our governance. And we prioritize hiring a local on our staff. So half of our team lives here in the neighborhood and, have very direct buy-in and intention around their work. I'm trying to think challenge. I feel like we've had so many challenges. There's which one do I pick? I mean, capital has been a challenge. Telling people you want unsecured debt is a challenge, right? Like, what do you mean I can't lien this money? I mean, you can't lien this money. I mean exactly what I just said. I don't know how else to say it, right? And having conversations around risk reward, right? Traditional capitalism, risk reward is the very clear, and risk to whom? Risk to you? What about risk to Kensington? What about risk to the people who are being displaced? What about risk to the people who will never be able to access bricks and mortar their business because the upfront cost of entry is so high, right? So a lot of our challenges have been rooted in undoing norms and undoing standards. And, one of my things that I kind of have been holding on to over the last few weeks as I've engaged with someone over the sale of these acquisitions that we're doing this Friday is that standards are choices, right? We as humans uphold standards by choice. right? It's not because someone is requiring us. We're not talking about regulatory things. We're talking about the way that we just engage in transactions and the way that we decide to show up in governance. They're choices. We set the standards. And so just like trying to reposition and reframe around risk, around traditional capitalism, around governance, around the way we view real estate as a commodity, a lot of it is reframing. So much of our work is reframing. And then alongside that, moving policy, because if you're not moving policy, you're doing bad way work, right? Real estate is a tool. It's not a means. It's not the end, right? It is literally a tool to get to where you're trying to go. We're trying to build collective neighborhood wealth, but we're also trying to ensure that the folks who live here are the ones who get to govern off into the future and are the ones that get to self-determine the future of this neighborhood, not outsiders, not the government, right? Like these folks. And it requires many stakeholders, right? I'm not saying there's not government infusion necessary, but they shouldn't be the sole determining factor.
Well, and that community building is so hugely important because, I mean, just, we were talking with Kevin earlier, whose entire home was in the river here in Swananoa. I'm here also in Asheville. Luckily, my property was not nearly affected like his was. But what I am seeing here is that when the traditional systems break down, even just things like cell phones and, being able to get gas and being able to get clean water and, being able to obtain food, when all those systems totally broke down, what we didn't see was people trying to sell the water they could find. What we saw was people trying to give and to support each other and to share the resources that they had with their community. There was a woman driving her truck with a water container because she had a well at her farm. When I got home one day, she was driving up my front and she was knocking on doors saying, "Hey, I got well water, get your buckets," basically. And that was the kind of attitude that we saw. And so the mutual aid that we've seen crop up through here, I apologize for going on a tangent here, but it's been so revealing to me is that while we can have all these debates about, reform and revolution and, all these different kinds of things, what we really should be doing is out here just building the networks that we all will need in order to survive the massive changes that we're all going to be going through and our families are going to be going through, because it's cool when I've got a stock of stuff in my garage to take care of my family for a couple of weeks, but no one of us has been able to sustain ourselves on our own. We've all needed the community here when those systems kind of break down. And so as the system becomes more prone to breaking down, and it happens more often, that resilience of networks that you guys are developing there is gonna weather that change better than any community that hasn't done this pre-planning. And so just I'm feeling a lot of alignment and really connecting with what you guys are doing there, and appreciate it a lot. And thank you for your time here with us. Are there any last closing thoughts you have for our audience here, the Main Street Journal, Neighborhood Economics, and Impact Alpha folks that are here?
Yeah, and Joel, really quickly, just before I move to close, thank you for sharing, that beautiful offering with all of us here today. I think it reminds me of this thing. I teach public policy course at Rutgers, and I start my course by always telling students, humans are a forgetful species, right? Like we act like everything is brand new. We pretend that we are innovating. This is all ancestral practice, right? Everything that we do, everything that we elevate is history. It is historic. It's in our DNA to help each other, to support collectivism, mutualism. We choose, again, these are standards. We choose not to practice this on a daily basis, but it is rooted, right? It is core to who we are. So just such a beautiful offering. In closing, what can I say? KCT is great. We love KCT. I'm biased. I love KCT. We are so happy to share, any of our learnings. We always love to be in community with others and learn from them. I think the thing that I would just ask that everyone kind of just holds on to is like, how can you help push some of this wherever you are, right? Like there are opportunities, there's low hanging fruit, no matter what neighborhood you're a part of, no matter where you are in the country, there are low hanging fruit everywhere for folks to collectivize and to have mutual aid and to support each other in a way that operates outside of the story and standards, outside of the norms. But again, it's like a choice. We have to make that choice.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for all of us that joined here today. We had a really great crew on here today. We'll be on, make sure to stay in touch with the Main Street Journal, Neighborhood Economics, Impact Alpha, and the Mindful Marketplace show for the next one of these that we've got coming up, I believe in, I'm not sure if we have one in 2 weeks or if we're taking a holiday break here, but we will be back with you all soon in the coming weeks and in the new year. Thanks so much again, Adriana. Thanks to Michael, thanks to Kevin, and thanks to Jen for being our coordinator and the person who does everything behind the scenes, the invisible, indispensable Jen Risley. Thanks so much. All right, everybody, you have a great rest of your day. Take care of yourselves. And remember, we are each other.